30 लाख रुपए की जॉब मिली है इसे, तू वो छोड़ रहा है. The world doesn't care if you launch a business. Only you care, right? And you have to make the world care much later. Even if nothing works out, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, we will not die poor and hungry. First 3 weeks of launch, we sold 4 copies. Outside of the fact that we started a business, I think we did everything wrong. Yeah, between security and opportunity, always choose opportunity. Who knew we wanted to be entrepreneurs? यही करने अगर 7 साल बाद भी, तो ये 7 साल वेस्ट करने की क्या जरूरत है? अभी कर लेते हैं. Class 9th and 10th I finished both ICSE and CBSE.
Hi everyone, welcome to the BarberShop with Shantanu. Today we have with us one of the OGs of Indian entrepreneurship, Rohit, who in addition to being the founder of Snapdeal along with Kunal, also is a prolific investor for more than a decade in Indian entrepreneurs and has probably backed more than 200 companies. So absolute pleasure, Rohit, to have you on the BarberShop. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Shantanu, for having me. And I don't know about the OG part, but I'm glad to be here nonetheless.
Your humility is a hallmark of all the discussions I've had with people who know you. And it's amazing to see someone who's achieved so much kind of continue just such a calm, and I think it's when you go beyond Maslow's hierarchy, right, is where you achieve this. But it's amazing to see you having done that over the last 15 years. But as we start off this episode, wanted to kind of go into your life before where you grew up, the kind of household you were in. I know we were having a discussion about it before, but would love to kind of understand that a little bit deeper.
Sure. First of all, pleasure to be here. And Shantanu, the day you called me for the first time, I think I can really relate to the basic theme that you have, and I think it's I've seen a similar experience in my life as well. So just about myself, I grew up in a very small town called Malot. Most people haven't heard the name. I don't blame them for it either. It's a town close to Bhatinda, which is because of Jab We Met, no people know at least Bhatinda. So since then I always quote Bhatinda. The population of the town is 70,000-80,000. Before Google Maps, I usually couldn't tell people where it is. But it's at the border of Pakistan, Rajasthan, Haryana, and in Punjab. So everything is 30-40 kilometers away. That's where I grew up, in a fairly small town, fairly agricultural society. My father was a grain merchant all his life, and then later a pesticides and fertilizers dealer and distributor. My mother's been a housewife. My father actually was one of very few people. Again, this is pre-internet era, so very few people used to study, especially in the town where I grew up. I remember my father went to Chandigarh to study his pharmacy, and that was supposed to be a big deal for the town, right? Because not many people step outside ever from the city to go out and study. And then he came back and sort of started this grain merchant business, which my grandfather created, and then my father continued with it. Then over a period of time, he became pesticides and fertilizers dealer. But I could tell that he always carried this feeling in his mind that he wanted to do something else. And because of that, he always had a very academic bent of mind. And he wanted to make sure that even though he's in a small town, even though all the other business people in the town would have the same playbook for their kids, that आप school जाओ और उसके बाद do after class 7th, 8th, you start coming to the shop and sitting here. And after you graduate, do whatever you want to do, BA, BSc, etc. Then you continue with the shop. I think my parents, I remember from childhood itself, were very clear that we want to educate our kids in the best possible way. Whatever, we could afford or the town could afford or whatever visibility we had. So I remember my parents always used to tell me even as a child, कि यार तुझे जो करना है तू first study well, as well as you can, then you choose. If you don't do anything else, this shop is always for you, but don't consider it as the primary option that you have. So that's the mindset with which I grew up. I had 2 elder sisters. All of us used to live in the same house. We actually lived in a joint family. So my father and his elder brother, which is my Tauji, we all used to live in the same house. They had 3 kids. My parents had 3 kids, so there were 6 kids in one house. The eldest one was 10 years older than me, and I was the youngest one. So literally there was 10 years older, 7 years older, 6 years older. So I think there was this huge series of kids. All of us went to the same school, etc. So that's where I grew up. I was fortunate enough to be decent at academics. And when you grow up in a small town, for a kid like me who was reasonably okay at academics in the school, it can swing both ways. You can grow up with one of two perceptions about yourself. You can either perceive that, hey, I'm doing well in class, so I'm God and I'm good at everything, and wherever I go, I'll be very good. Or you can grow up with the perception, which is what I grew up with, where I used to believe that I'm okay as long as I'm in this small school and with 20 kids in the class, etc. But the moment I step out, I don't know how I'll cope up, and it definitely won't be good enough, at a larger scale of things.
Why would you feel that? Like, is it because you used to watch big city life on television, or did you meet some family members who were in Delhi or in some of the big cities of India where you felt that that's a life that is very different from what you grew up?
Actually, I didn't have much exposure at all, honestly. So because I grew up in this town, my mom was from another even smaller town, which was 15 kilometers away. And our life used to revolve around just these two towns. And, sometimes for holidays, we would at best go to Chandigarh or Delhi. I think that was the farthest we had seen. Till the time my real mama moved to Delhi in the 90s, we had not seen any urban life at all. I think the biggest town for us was Bhatinda, which is where we used to go to shop or watch a movie, because there were not many cinemas where we used to live. So I don't think it was a perception created by what I had seen as a child. It was just, I think, somehow a self-created perception in some ways, that because, a small town, sometimes you are brought up seeing that. I remember I used to watch this Bonvita quiz contest. Now I remember these. And those kids used to be so smart. They used to talk in English, which, growing up in Punjab, even though I went to an English medium school, I'd never spoken in English for the longest time. And I think looking at those kids, I used to think, ye to alag hi hai. These kids are too smart. And if I had to ever compete with these kids, obviously I stand no chance. I think that's probably one of the reasons which created that self-perception. And I remember we had a teacher in our school, I still remember his name, Vijay sir. And he used to be, this is the pre-internet era, he used to be our town's connection with the future of academics. And he used to be a relatively more forward guy, used to know about exams, which again in big cities are very well known, like NTSC, etc. But in our smaller towns, no one really knew the names. So I started going to study with him post class 6. He is the one who prodded me and pushed me कि यार तू और भी try कर exam शायद तेरा कुछ हो जाएगा. So he is the one. I remember there was some exam which was a national level exam. I don't think it's even very popular, but it was the first national level exam he made me give in class 8th or 9th, some science exam. And that was the first time I went and gave that exam. And then when the results came, I was some rank 13 or 14. Some 12, 13, somewhere in that zip code. And this was the first time me, as well as my parents realized कि यार इसके तो national exam पे भी ठीक आ जाते number. So that was the first time I realized that maybe there is something. It could be a fluke because it was only once, but at least there was some validation outside of the school curriculum. So that was the first time I did that. Then I think NTSC is a lot more popular exam for class 10th. I was in ICSC board, I remember. He made me go through all the CBSE books also to prepare for NTSC. कि तो यार CBSE का course भी पढ़ ले. मैंने कहा ठीक है, वो भी पढ़ लेते. So in class 9th and 10th, I finished both ICSE and CBSE on my own. And I think NTSC was again probably one of the bigger exams where I did okay. I came first or second in Punjab, which is supposed to be a big deal. And I think that's when my parents, as well as I, probably started getting a sense that maybe there is something here which is slightly better than getting decent marks in a small town. And the only thing most people, almost anyone in my town knew about further education was that whoever gets decent marks in class 10th goes to DPS Arkipuram. That's it. I mean,
In
we
Delhi.
didn't even know there are other branches of DPS, by the way. The only thing we knew is there is a school known as DPS RKपुरम, जिसके 90 से ऊपर नंबर आते हैं, वो DPS RKपुरम में चला जाता है because they only take kids who get more than 90%. I was fortunate to be one of those kids, and I think got decent marks in class 10th, above 90, and that's how I landed up.
You're so humble. Like at that time, getting 95%. Was that the highest score ever in the history?
So I think before I passed out of class 10th in 99, and before that the highest score in the exam was actually my elder sister's class, which is 7 years older than me. She was 92, I think.
Okay.
And that girl I remember got a 93%. And then after 7 years, that was the highest record of our sort of tiny school back then. And then 7 years later, I got 95. So in the history of the school, it was a good deal. But when you come to Delhi, you realize it's common enough, it seemed. But I was very fortunate. That's how I landed up in Delhi to DPS RKpuram. For some reason, I always was under the impression or convinced that I liked maths more than biology. So it was pre-decided. Either you're a doctor or an engineer. That's all people used to think in our town. And because I liked maths more than biology, then it was a sort of pre-decided thing that I'll go into engineering. So I came to DPS RKpuram 99. After coming here, I'd heard of something known as IIT, but again, the myth in our town, no one in our town had ever gone to an IIT since forever, right? I mean, maybe some guy had gone 15 years back or something, but I mean, no one had seen that guy who's too old, etc., etc. So as a result, there was this urban legend in our town कि IIT में नहीं होता. At best, you go give Punjab CET and go to one of the good engineering colleges in Punjab. I came to Delhi to DPS, and that's when I realized people go to coaching for IIT. The day I landed up in the hostel, I saw a lot of kids were going to this exam for Vidya Mandir classes, which is very popular apparently. And then they said, "Kal exam hai," so I thought I'll also sign up. So I landed up for the exam. Apparently, the selection rate of VMC in itself is very hard.
Yeah.
Because they take only 200 kids. So again, I was lucky enough to get in there as well. And that's how I actually started preparing for IIT. I had no clue because before that, there was no belief that one can actually prepare for and go to IIT because I had never met a human being who had been to IIT. And this was again pre-internet era. So, even it was so unrelatable for us, right? Because in the whole history of the town, the best you hear is, again, not good enough for IIT. Yeah. So when I landed up here, then I ended up going to VMC. Then I think slowly and steadily, my confidence also started increasing a little bit. NTSC bhi theek ho gaya tha. In class 10th also. It is a nationally accredited exam, not a school exam, where I got decent marks. Then I came here, got into VMC. I think by that time I'd started gaining a little more confidence in my own ability, academically speaking. And also then we used to meet a lot of our seniors in DPS in hostel. And a year later, we realized many of them themselves ended up going to IIT. So it became a little more relatable कि यार ठीक है हमारे जैसे ही हैं ये लोग इनका हो गया तो शायद हमारा भी हो जाएगा. So that's how one thing led to the other. I started preparing for IIT. Ended up going to IIT Delhi. Did my computer.
क्या थी रैंक क्या थी आपकी?
118.
Wow.
So.
Were you expecting that?
I mean, by the end of it, I was expecting to be sub 500.
Okay.
For sure. I think because, VMC takes enough tests.
For you to have an accurate calibration.
You used to get a sense that, you can't be faking it so many times. कि हर बार ठीक number आ रहे हैं तो शायद hopefully something will happen. I think by that time I'd started feeling a little more comfortable. And it is, I remember when I came to DPS again even though I went to an English medium school, I'd never really spoken in English per se. And I still remember the first day in DPS, if I'm not mistaken, most of the kids in DPS are from Delhi and there's a small percentage who've come in class 11th into the hostel. And I remember I was sitting in like this really back corner of the class and the class teacher said, "Why don't each of you start introducing yourself?" So kids started introducing themselves from there. For me, the biggest worry was not to make the introduction, but that we'll have to speak 3 sentences in English. And me and there was another kid sitting next to me also from a small town. Both of us started sweating. कि अच्छा English में 3 sentence में introduction देनी पड़ेगी. So that's the sort of background I grew up with. But very quickly, the moment I came into DPS, within the first few weeks, me and Kunal bumped into each other. So we were in the same class, same section in DPS.
Oh, is it?
That's also very important for DPS because it had 23 sections in class 12. So class 12th in itself was 1,000 people strong. So just being in the same class is not good enough. So then I think that's where I bumped into Kunal, and both of us bumped into each other. We sort of instantly hit it off. This was very early days of class 11th. And he grew up in Delhi. He had been to DPS all his life. But we hit it off, and then slowly and steadily we started sitting together with each other. And for the next 2 years, we sat next to each other, and I think that's how we became the closest of friends in school.
Wow, but he went on to study outside.
Yeah,
India.
so then, so both of us used to hang out quite a bit. Both of us shared a common passion for jokes and good food. So I was this very traditional baniya, vegetarian, etc. When I came to Delhi, he is the one who introduced me to non-vegetarian food. His mother cooks the best biryani on the planet. I used to go to his home from hostel to eat the biryani, especially from his mother. So that he converted me to a non-vegetarian. He said, Rohit, you're missing half the fun in life. So that's how we became friends. We used to we used to obviously hang out with each other all the time. And then after class 12th finished, we used to keep talking about, different things, just when you're close to each other and when you sit next to each other for 6 hours a day for 2 years, then you talk about everything on the planet, right?
Correct.
So, and we used to also talk about that someday we'll start a business of our own. He wanted to start a business. I wanted to start a business of our own. We didn't know what to do, when, etc. But just we used to have this very conceptual discussion कि यार कभी कुछ करेंगे. And then I went to IIT Delhi. He went to UPenn. But again, both of us used to keep in touch whenever he would come back for his holidays, summer vacation, winter vacation. I used to be in Delhi, fortunately, and his home was in Delhi. So we used to get together, go to all the sort of eat all you can buffets. Both of us used to be really, really overweight back then. And so that's how our friendship sort of stayed current. And then I graduated. He also graduated. Both of us graduated at the same time. And, the original plan that, I at least had was that I'll work for a few years after engineering, go to the US and try and do an MBA, pay off the loan, and then work for a few years in the US and then come back and then start something of my own. I remember he was back home. This was first year after we had started working. And then we got to talking, he said, ki kya plan hai? And I told him the whole 7-year plan of how we'll become, at some point of time in life, entrepreneurs. Then he said, yaar, yahi karna hai agar 7 saal baad bhi. तो ये 7 साल वेस्ट करने की क्या जरूरत है, अभी कर लेते हैं. We were 22, 23 back then. We had no liabilities, no responsibilities. We were not married, no kids, very few expenses, etc. And this was, in hindsight, a very good time because no one had any expectations from us. We were very young. We could fail as many times as we could and still be okay. So that's how one thing led to the other. And
where were you working at the time? Out of IIT?
I was working with Capital One.
Okay.
This is the US credit card company. And
Correct.
I was also we were in a very peculiar situation also, I remember, is I got recruited for the US. Okay. And that year, when they were supposed to send me to the US, the 65,000 visas ran out. And they couldn't apply for my visa. So they told me that, why don't you work in Bangalore for a year? Fortunately, they had just opened an office in India. And next year you go to the US. So next year they applied for my visa. Kunal started working with Microsoft in the US. Till this time we didn't really have, we used to think that we'll start something, but there were no concrete plans. As luck would have it, his visa got rejected sitting in the US.
He just put up a post recently about the letter from the Microsoft HR.
So I remember this is because both our companies applied for visa at the same time for H1Bs. I was in Bangalore and my company, Capital One applied for me, and Kunal applied in the US. Microsoft applied for him. And it was such a funny thing that mine got approved while I was living in India, and his got rejected while he had spent 6 years in the US. I mean, in hindsight, it is so unfair, but I mean, just it
Life
was a
happens.
lucky draw, so I don't know how much you could do about it. And I think that's how maybe what was otherwise a very virtual and sort of tentative discussion started becoming very real. He said, "Look, I mean, this is my situation. This is gonna happen. So, but you have your visa. So, what do you want to do?" So I said, "ठीक है, मैं भी करूँ. क्या करूँगा जाके?" So, if you are coming anyways, and at some point of time we are thinking of starting our own business, I actually gave up on my visa, and both of us started the business
Wow,
together.
that's incredible. And
So I actually never ended up being in the US, even though I had an approved H1B.
And-
And my parents and everyone in my family went in shock because there was this small town kid who went to went to IIT first, then got a job in the US. In those times, people didn't used to know dollars and all, right? In India, तो ऐसे लोग count करते थे. अच्छा $60,000 की $60,000 30 लाख रुपए की जॉब मिली है इसे. तू वो छोड़ रहा है, पागल हो गया तू, etc. etc. So I mean, I used to get those reactions, but I mean, it's fine. So that's how we ended up starting our business together. So
But-
he came back, and I never ended up being in the US.
it's interesting because a lot of co-founder stories I hear are from people who either are in college together or at work together. But in your case, it was actually school friends who did it, which is fairly unique because it's easy to lose touch with school friends.
It is, especially in that age, which phones were almost a rarity. At best, there were some emails, and the only way we used to keep in touch was when he came back to Delhi. Then we would sort of hang out, and that sort of
Was that enough?
to some extent, yes. I mean, it was and it wasn't. I think eventually we probably obviously became much closer when he finally moved back. And I think both of us, because of our friendship in class 11th and 12th, probably had enough faith in each other to do something together. So I think eventually it all worked out. But those 4 years were not as frequent because again in that time
No WhatsApp.
I didn't have money to make an ISD call, neither did
Yeah.
he. So and it's not like we were girlfriend boyfriend chatting on a long distance relationship either. So but I think eventually it all worked out.
Wow, that's incredible. And
And I think it was a good thing also, if you ask me. I mean, I'm just speaking for what worked for us. Is because he had gone to the US and I was here. While we were the best of friends and we had a lot of respect and trust in each other, we also had very different perspectives because of the 4 or 5 years we had done academia, right? Because US has a very different way of education, and you grew up in a different way in some ways, and I went to IIT, where you grew up in a very different way. So in some ways, I think not that we made that much calculation while starting the business, but I think those skill sets also became complementary to some extent.
give me examples of that. Like, what do you
Many
think?
things, right? So at least I've realized that between the two of us, at least my education background, especially with IIT, etc., was always very first principles based, very inside out, if I may, right? While we learn the concept first, then figure out if there is ever an application of it, right? And whereas I feel the US education system is a lot more application oriented, that where you figure out solve kya karna hai, then let me figure out what I need to learn to solve that. So hence I think we had, because of our academics that we had gone through, we had these two different approaches to look at the same problem. I was always look at, let's figure out what to do first, and then we'll figure out how to use it. He will always start with, let's figure out what we need it for,
Yeah.
and then let's figure out what we need to do. So in some ways, I think that just, was a interesting complementarity. Secondly, I think in school, he used to be a big introvert. I remember Kunal used to never talk. Both of us were the same, never used to talk to people. Very, very sort of contained between the bubble of the two of us, etc., etc. And I could see a remarkable change in his personality in the 4 or 5 years he spent in the US. He became a lot more expressive, lot more, outgoing, lot more talkative. He could talk to many people. He became a lot more social. He could connect with new people, which is a skill that I never picked up going to IIT. So that also became an interesting difference between the two of us, which wasn't there when we were together in school. So there were many differences that over a period of time we realized when we started working together.
And do you remember the moment where I think giving up for a small town student to become, crack the toughest exam, go to India's best college and get a great job, going to the US. I'm assuming this would have been 2005, 6, 7, right? So would have been the dream, right? But to give that up and to put it into a company with a school friend who you may not have been closest in touch with was a big deal. Was there a moment where that kind of happened? Was there like a whiteboarding session or a eureka moment that this is a huge opportunity?
See, the huge opportunity part I'll come to later. I think at least for the longest time I remember, in some of the very important decisions, I'm very calculated in some things, but very impulsive in some other things, right? So I've seen that in the big decisions in life, I'm actually quite impulsive in nature, myself. And I don't over-calculate. I just, sort of go with the flow. And this was one of those things where he said something. Having seen some business people around myself, since I was a kid, I wanted to first be an IAS officer, but then later it moved on to being in some form of business, because I started, enjoying seeing the ups and downs in business and how that keeps your life very interesting. So I knew that I will end up doing a business at some point of time. Both of us had chatted enough that we want to do something together. To be completely honest, I didn't really overthink the decision at that point of time. कि यार मैं क्या छोड़ रहा हूँ, क्या नहीं छोड़ रहा. I felt it at that point of time. It seemed like a good decision. It seemed like an interesting choice. And I remember back then, Kunal and me used to chat a lot around this topic as well. And I remember once we were chatting, and he said, which is a fair point in hindsight, and we read some articles also on this topic, between security and opportunity, always choose opportunity, which I still hold very dearly with myself. And I still remember that line, even though it's been 15 years now.
Yeah.
That just security, you will always regret, right? We knew that we wanted to start a business. We knew here was an opportunity where we could do it right now. If we don't do it right now, God knows when we will do it. But then, even if we fail, it's okay. But if we are old and we always look back, yaar, hame kuch karna tha, we wanted to start a business, but we never did. We just didn't want to carry that regret. We really wanted to do something, and now time has passed and we didn't really act upon it. That keeping that regret is not worth it. Secondly, both of us fortunately had gone to decent colleges. He had gone to UPenn and Wharton, which is as good as it gets. I also had gone to IIT. So, by that time we also knew, look, all said and done, even if nothing works out, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, we will not die poor and hungry. Yeah. Right? So I think given the backgrounds that we came from, even that was a good enough security to have. कि यार कोई ना कोई तो जॉब दे ही देगा, 3, 4, 5 साल नहीं चलेगा, क्या होगा? वर्स्ट केस IIT, UPenn, Wharton की डिग्री लेके कहीं ना कहीं we'll get a decent job where we'll not be dying poor and hungry. So that's enough of a security net that Correct. You want to have. After that, I think people like us who've had decent academic background, been fortunate, etc., should be taking our chances. हम नहीं लेंगे तो कौन लेगा? So किसी को तो try करना चाहिए.
But was there was conviction in doing something?
Yeah.
At what point did both of you build conviction on what you wanted to do?
So it's a very interesting story. So actually our conviction was always to do something. So I've seen that over the years, having seen many entrepreneurial journeys as well. I've seen there are 2 types of entrepreneurs. One type is people who come across a very good idea, become really passionate about that idea, and then they just have to turn it into a business, come what may. We were not those people. We were the other camp who knew we wanted to be entrepreneurs. Idea what to do, we had no clue, right? So we would sit in a room and try and come up with what are the possible ideas and then come up with one. But we were not the people who had the idea first and then became entrepreneurs. We were the people we wanted to be entrepreneurs first. So we sort of, decided कि हमें करना है. अब सोचते क्या क्या करें. And I think then, I remember our first idea, was actually starting a movie ticketing site. This is when Book My Show had not launched. So हमने plan बना लिया, movie tickets की site बनाएंगे. We started talking to 1 or 2 cinemas also. And then this was we had still not left our jobs, by the way. And then 3 days later, we read that Book My Show, this company Book My Show had started and they've raised a lot of money. We were college kids, we had no clue. So we said, "Achha, ye to ho gaya, now let's come up with something else." So that's how I think, we came up with the idea later. And then that also, as luck would have it, had to change many times before we ended up doing what we are doing right now.
But what was the first thing that you actually went to market with?
This is 2007-8. And, this was again, very few internet users in India. And our first business actually had nothing to do with internet also. There was this concept in the US, which had become very popular, of coupon booklets. Especially in the university campuses, etc. You could buy a coupon booklet, which would have a lot of buy one, get one free, etc. type tearable coupons. So we thought कि यार ये तो बहुत अच्छा idea, इंडिया में तो कोई कर नहीं रहा, retail sector is growing so much in
This
India.
Kunal's UPenn
so Kunal
inspiration.
was in the UPenn, he brought this thick fat book and said, "रोहित देखो इसमें कितने coupon हैं." मैंने कहा बात तो सही है, coupon तो बहुत सारे हैं. So that's how then we thought no one is doing it in India. Retail is going to become a multi-billion-dollar industry. People would need coupons, and that's the only conviction both 23-year-olds needed. कि हाँ यार ये बड़ा business बन जाएगा. We didn't know what is the concept of market sizing and this TAM, SAM, etc. All we learned later, right? Because both of us had cumulatively worked a year each maximum. So that's how we started as a physical coupon booklet business, right?
Wow.
It used to be called Money Saver. I still have one of those old copies with me. And again, this is the classic example of all the things that you do. Outside of the fact that we started a business, I think we did everything wrong, right? In the first year. We started in 2007. Then there was only 2 of us. We obviously had no money, only our savings for
how much did you guys put in initially? Each?
10 लाख रुपए के आसपास. इतने थे साल के, जो एक साल की सैलरी
जो बचे सब लगा. Not bad, यार. Not bad. 20 lakhs as seed capital for 2 of you.
So, that was all we had. So there was nothing else. Outside of that, I used to borrow money from my dad to pay rent.
कहाँ रहते आप लोग? Where would you stay?
So first we started from Kunal's house in Punjabi Bagh, which is where his parents used to live. And then I rented a small, I remember, 6,000 rupee room close to Punjabi Bagh, which is where I used to live.
Really?
Wow. So that's how we started and then we sort of found another basement of house which used to cost 18,000 rupees for rental, etc. So we thought कि हमें coupon books का business start करना है, and there was only 2 of us. And then we talked to not a single customer. This was supposed to be a sort of product which we would sell to end consumers. So we made sure we want to build the best product out there. Right? There was only 2 of us going and signing up restaurants and spa वाता तो बहुत नहीं थे. So restaurants, salons, some retail chains, etc. to get really attractive offers that buy one get one free.
And your pitch to them was कि ये करोगे तो customer तुम्हारे पास.
Customer को बेचेंगे coupon booklet. तो customer वो coupon, because of us, instead of eating some other ice cream, they will eat your ice cream. Let's say, right? And
your acquisition funnel.
So and that used to be our pitch. So somehow or the other, we hustled our way and sort of we were very clear that we want to create the absolute best product with the best coupons out there without talking to a single consumer of what they want. Right? So it took us 1 year to launch the first product, which was a coupon booklet. And then by that time, both of us used to sign up deals. We became so convinced because you get married to what you're building, right? So we got so married to what we were building, so convinced that what we are building is the next best thing that mankind has ever seen, and everyone in humanity is waiting for it.
Both of you?
हाँ, both of us.
तुम दोनों में से कोई ऐसा नहीं, there was no devil's advocate in the room.
कुछ नहीं. हमने customer से तो बात करी नहीं ना कभी. So I mean, between the 2 of us, we were super convinced. So then we were so convinced in this idea that the day we launch, there's going to be a queue to buy these coupon booklets, which we were selling for 299 rupees.
Okay. कितने coupons थे उसमें?
50 or so.
Not bad.
Right? So, and I think we became so convinced in just talk about being in a bubble, right? And what you can do when you don't talk to customers. we thought यार books खत्म ना हो जाए, so let's print enough. So we printed 20,000 copies of the first one. I think वो जो 20 लाख में से शायद 15 लाख हमने printing में लगा दिए, right? So we printed so many booklets because we were so sure that people will just will be dying to get their hands onto this. First 3 weeks of launch, we sold 4 copies. Like the number 4, not 4,000, not 400, not 40. Like absolute 4 copies. And that was the first reality.
But what was your go-to market? Like, did you launch it on like a website?
Website bhi nahi thi. That is the other interesting thing. We spent so much time in building it, we actually forgot how to sell it. It's only after we printed the booklets that we realized that बेचेंगे कहाँ. ऐसे थोड़ी होगा कि ऑफिस के बाहर लोग खड़े होंगे खरीदने के लिए. We still have to figure out way to sell it. So then after that we started hustling, and some of the outlets whose coupons we had put, we convinced them to sort of stock some booklets on their counters, etc. So it was all over the place GTM, to be completely honest. So that's the reason I said, outside of the fact that we had started a company, I don't think we did anything right. Right? So we sold 4. And that was the first reality check here. What is this? एक साल लगा दिया to build something that no one wants to buy. And then that was the first time we started iterating to change the sort of form factor of the product, because these books had a 6-month expiry date also, right? Because these coupons are not perennial.
Correct.
So if we had spent so much money in printing, 6 months later, it will be kabadi.
Correct.
Right? Because the expiry would have passed and this money will be
useless,
completely gone to zero. So then first we changed the form factor to a card along with SMS, etc. So we sort of started making some iterations. And that started seeing slightly better adoption. The shelf life became a little better. In between, we also realized that just doing this consumer business will take a long time for consumers to start buying the product. And I mean, we don't have much money, and we should start thinking of some other ways to pay the bills as well. And that's the time when we started doing couponing as a service for banks and credit card companies. So you know how all these credit card companies have the restaurant offers and etc. etc. So we became the back end for that. So if a credit card company wants to launch an offer program, we would go to them, we would tell them, यार हम आपको offer ला देंगे, हम सबको जानते हैं, right? So they would give us the contract. It became a B2B service. They used to pay us per offer. We used to go around town, because by now we knew every restaurant in Delhi, every shop in Delhi. Both me and Kunal used to sign up restaurants and offers for them. So that became B2B. Some money started coming into the business, and we started paying some of the bills. But we kept iterating like this. So, restaurant offers for credit card companies, then our own booklet, and which later became a card, which was called Money Saver. So we kept doing that for some time. It was a very nice, small little business. Not much revenue, but not much cost either. And
what is Money Saver like at a top line and bottom line level?
It must be few lakhs
a year, a month.
ऐसे कुछ होगा, 2-4 लाख रुपए maximum per month. It was like really, so tiny that it didn't matter, right? So,
but I'm sure you both, given your pedigree, given your ambition, intellect, you wanted to do something big.
Yeah, we wanted to do something more meaningful than this for sure.
Correct.
Right? How big we didn't know, but regardless of how small our ambition would be, this would definitely be smaller than that. Right? So I think that we knew for sure.
So was there a line of, did you have a line of sight for Money Saver, or were you trying to create it? So
one of the other things we had decided when we started the business, I think some maybe our parents' wisdom or something or the other, we had told ourselves that, look, for 3 to 4 years, we will not rethink when we start the business. Chale, nahi chale, whether first idea works, doesn't work, it doesn't matter. For 3 to 4 years at least, we will not give up. Right? That was something that both me and Kunal had an understanding when we were starting the business, because we assumed it may or may not work. So that's, I think, one good thing we had done right at the start. कि हम 3-4 साल तो कम से कम लगे रहेंगे, चले या ना चले. So then we knew that we have to keep changing, keep iterating. Again, the word iteration we learned later of, pivoting and iterating. All these things we didn't know, because, we were very green when we started the business. And I think our first launch was in 2008. So things kept chugging along slowly and steadily till 2010. We kept looking for something else to do. And in 2010, I remember, Groupon had launched in the US, and internet had started becoming slightly more
Mainstream.
visible in India, right? Still desktop, not mobile, but at least it started being there. And a few companies had started doing this in India as well, the Groupon type stuff.
Yeah.
Given we knew all the restaurants and everything, they knew us, they knew कि ये पढ़े लिखे लोग हैं, decent pedigree, etc. We know them, they get offers from us. So some of them called us in 2010. कि यार we are hearing this coupon website type thing, and we didn't know what Groupon was, by the way, at that, even though it had started in the US. And they said, यार आप लोग तो यही कर रहे हो, आपकी बुकलेट में है, ये ऑनलाइन है, तो आप लोग को हम जानते हैं, आप लोग ठीक हो, आप लोग कर लो यार, आप लोग कर सकते हो ये. So when 2-3 calls came, then me and Kunal, both of us got together. Our partners are calling us and telling us, यार आप ऐसा कुछ शुरू कर लो. Right? Then we found out what is Groupon, and then we thought कि चलो maybe we should do this, because honestly this business wasn't too dissimilar from what we were doing. It was just an online version of our own business. And this time we didn't want to make the same mistake of taking a year to build the business. So this time we were really, really fast. Here, like go to market pretty much at the speed of light. I still remember the date, right? Because it's very, very important and very close to us. So we got together, sat in a Costa Coffee. One day we decided we will do it. We will do it really fast. We created the blueprints. We did. Next 2-3 days we came up with the name. And Feb 4th we were live. That fast. I mean, 8 days. It was a very crappy website. Used to hang half the time. Used to crash half the time.
What was the name?
Snapdeal. This was finally.
This was Snapdeal.
This was the time when Snapdeal.com was this. Actually,
Born.
Snapdeal.in at that time. .com domain we bought later for 2 lakh rupees.
Okay.
So this is, I think, how we ended up starting Snapdeal. And this time it was in 8-10 days.
Wow.
Because we had learned our lesson. कि यार वो 1 साल लगा दिया, कुछ समझ ही नहीं आया. This time we were very clear. चले नहीं चले. So, and it used to. I mean, when I'm saying it, I'm not joking. It did used to crash half the time, but we were live, right? And because in the early days, as it is, I feel as entrepreneurs sometimes you end up overplaying how things will work in your mind.
Correct.
Actually, कोई आता नहीं है साइड पे. अब आप लोगों को कईयों को सुनते हैं ना कि यार हमने साइट बना दी, etc. I've seen more often than not. People have this wild imagination, vivid imaginations कि हम साइट लॉन्च करेंगे, पता नहीं क्या हो जाएगा. Actually, पहले हफ्ते में कोई नहीं आता. Right? So we thankfully we knew that from experience now that actually the world doesn't care.
Yeah.
If you launch a business, only you care.
Correct.
Right? And you have to make the world care much later.
Correct. Unless you're in a place like where, and I once did a session where I was like 80% answer ले जाओ and keep iterating, because I've learned this the hard way. कि in our case, for example, we take sharp metal to a person's face. So there is a certain higher bar. You can't take an 80% product to a consumer that way.
Yeah, of course.
I was talking to someone in pharma. They said you cannot. That's why R&D cycles in our world are like decades long sometimes, because you can't take the wrong product.
Yeah.
But in case of tech, where the cost of failure is negligible.
Yeah.
Like it's just a website crashing or a experience which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
But then iterating is just so much more important.
And I remember we launched on Feb 4th. Obviously, no one came outside of
Friend
two
and
of us
family.
and our employees.
How many people did you have at that time?
8 or 9 maybe.
And there was
all of them were sort of intern/first year
Young,
freshers. None of them from the IITs, etc. We couldn't afford any of that. Right? So these are all very.
And this
very
is
young
no
people.
external capital till that point?
At that time we had raised, which I'll come to as well. I think by the time we launched Snapdeal, we had raised
Okay.
Series A.
Okay.
Right. So we launched on Feb 4th. Obviously, no one came to the website, but we started hustling, calling all our friends, families, etc. We kept this internal target. We used to have a sort of a deal a day that all of us, the 10-15 of us, कि यार हर एक को एक रोज कूपन बेचना है. किसी को भी बेचो, doesn't matter who you call, but you have to sell 1 coupon a day. Each. Right. So then all of us, the moment the deal would go live, we'll start working the phones. Start calling all of our friends, यार ये रेस्टोरेंट की आज डील चल रही है, यहाँ चले जाओ, etc. But I think something very interesting started happening. One, it started resonating with people, right? So yes, we would hustle and call them, but people actually did end up buying and did
On
end
their
up
own.
going to use it, and did used to say कि हाँ ठीक था, and then they used to tell their friends also, right? So that started working well. Secondly, we started getting real consumer feedback, right, from all these people we used to call. Like for example, I remember very vividly the first thing one of the people said is, यार आपकी website पे मैं जाता हूँ, वहाँ पे it's like an e-commerce website, right? You have to pay and buy a coupon, but I can't trust it. I know you, which is why I'm trusting you कि मेरे पैसे कहीं नहीं जाएंगे, but otherwise if this is a random website, I can't trust it. So what can you do? So I remember back then, mobile phones everyone used to have, but people used to trust कि जहाँ पे landline number है वहाँ पे मतलब इनके पास they have something, it's not just
physical presence.
So we put a landline number on the top of our website just to build credibility and trust that okay, if these guys have an establishment where someone is answering a landline phone, then there must be some physical presence that these guys have.
And there's a functioning landline phone where people would call and would
actually, I mean, this was our office number, right?
Achha.
Me, Kunal, or one of our team members would answer the call. So I remember that. I mean, this very small insight, but very important, right? Because that's how consumers are seeing your business. And we learned so much in 3 weeks after launch, even with the crappy website, which I remember in 2007-8 when we launched Money Saver, we had not learned that much even a year. Right. So, but then the cycle of iteration started. We started making changes, etc. And that's what finally things started working for us. And 2010, I remember, again, Groupon was there in the US, but even in India, 30-40 companies started doing exactly the same thing. Like, you know how things are in India many times. But I think then we out-executed everyone, right? Because we were too hungry. हम 2.5 साल से लगे हुए थे, कुछ हो ही नहीं रहा था, तो इतने हमारे पे इतनी पेंट अप एनर्जी थी कि यार फाइनली कुछ मिल गया जो चल रहा है. We will just like go all in, right? Correct. We spent, before other people were thinking 10th deal, we were in second city. Before other people were thinking second city, we were in 4th city. So we were just like, we went nuts because after 2.5-3 years of hunger, energy, and sort of breaking our heads against a wall, we were finally realizing that when we put in effort, result also comes. We had almost forgotten that. कि अगर आप थोड़ा effort मारो तो result भी आता है.
Correct.
ये पहली बार हो रहा था हमारे साथ कि कुछ कर रहे थे तो उसका
you want to milk it fully.
So then we went all in, right? We just like worked really, really hard in that period. And even though there were 30-40 players, within a year's time, we had 70% market share in this space. We just became by far the dominant player in this space.
Wow. And what were the kind of, like, I'm sure there was an 80-20 in terms of the kind of coupons. Was it food? Was it experiences? What?
Food, adventure, and all of those experiences, and spas and salons. Only these three. And we had only 2 mantras to make it successful. Mantra number 1, the deal has to be absolutely the best. We would just not settle. We will keep negotiating, send our team back. And our sales team used to hate me because I used to be the biggest, whatever the word for
Extractor.
that is. कि यार डील अच्छी नहीं होगी मैं वापस भेज दूंगा. लगाएंगे तो डंकी लगे, दिन में एक लगानी है, but we will put only the absolute best deal. We will just not settle because that's what our product is. We are a coupons website. If the coupon is this 10-15%, that doesn't cut it. It has to be a buy one get one free on a buffet so that people get real value. So that was number 1. Number 2, we will expand as fast as possible, right? We were in Delhi. We went to Bombay, Bangalore. Then we split Delhi into 6 pieces: North Delhi, South Delhi, West Delhi, because we realized that वो haircut पे deal लेने के लिए कोई Rohini से no one's going to go to South Delhi to get a haircut deal. Right? So we started breaking cities into smaller pieces. But these were the only 2 principles we had: geographical proximity and the best deal.
Best deal possible.
And then we kept expanding.
And how do you make money in that situation? Like, how do you make money off a coupon?
We used to have a cut. So, for example, if it's a 1,000 rupee buffet, we'll say in 1,000 rupees you give a buy one get one free, and 10-15% of that 1,000 rupees we used to keep.
So 900 रुपए में 2 जने का buffet था वो basically.
So customer used to pay 1,000, 100 used to come to us, 900 used to go to the restaurant. They used to give buffet for 2.
But that's amazing. But for a
customer, it was great value.
But for the restaurant, he's basically giving 2,000.
They used to see it as a customer acquisition channel. There was, I think that was the simplest thing and that's the reason the most common restaurants and salons and etc. we used to get were relatively newer establishments. which had a good product, but they had never induced trial. And this was a great way for people to induce trial for their business.
Wow.
So we did that for a couple of years, became the largest, raised, I think by that time we raised our Series A, B, C also.
Tell me about Series A. What it happened before 26th of Jan.
Before Snapdeal also.
Okay.
But let me just complete this. And then I think by the time, late 2012, even though we had 70% market share, we had again started realizing that the market is not large enough. It's okay that there were many players. It was better than what we were doing earlier, but we can't build a very large business in this space, because we started realizing that the moment you go outside of 4-5 cities in India, there are 3 restaurants in the whole town. Right? And when you have 3 restaurants in the whole town, what will a coupons business do?
Yeah.
Because those are the only 3. And you can't really sell coupons for the only restaurant in town, right? Because why would they give you an offer?
Correct.
So we started feeling that there is
headwind.
There is a cap to this space. And I think that's when both me and Kunal happened to go to China end of 2012. Just to explore, and just, people used to say, go to China, see what's going on in right there. So one day we actually booked a ticket and we just landed up in China just to see what's going on in China. And I think what we saw there was mind-blowing, because e-commerce in India was still really, really small at that point of time. And it's in China for the first time we saw that e-commerce companies were doing hundreds of thousands, or in some cases millions of orders a day. And that's when it became very real to us that, looks like product e-commerce is large. We came back to India and we thought, let's start dabbling around with product e-commerce as well. Although it seemed very different from what we were doing, but it was very early days of internet. There were not too many e-commerce companies also. That's how we started dabbling with product. Like, we used to think of it like deals. कि हम रेस्टोरेंट के डील चला रहे हैं, चलो 2 नीचे प्रोडक्ट्स के डील भी चला देते हैं, 1 pair of sunglasses and 1 other deal. And I think first day itself they started doing quite well, because suddenly everyone in the country could buy. Unlike in our coupons business, where people in 4-5 cities could buy. In this case, everyone was eligible as a customer. And very quickly we started realizing that we started putting 1 deal a day for products, but the number of products we would sell started becoming larger than the number of coupons we would sell. So slowly and steadily the space we give to products kept on increasing, to the point where within 6-7 months, we actually thought, even then we had 70% market share, we started seeing it as a distraction to run the coupons business, because that became so tiny as compared to our products business. That's when we finally gave up the coupons business and became a product e-commerce company somewhere in 2013.
Wow. But even I don't remember buying anything online in 2012. I personally, I think I must have been in my job. I probably had the best phone around at that time, or laptop or whatever. I don't remember buying online. So I cannot imagine how hard it must have been to fulfill orders also, like getting a logistics team in place. कैसे भेजते थे आप?
It was tough. I mean, look, it's all a matter of perspective, right? If you look at from today's scales, when e-commerce is millions of orders a day, obviously those numbers are small.
Correct.
But if you look at from the scale of coupon businesses would sell 1,000 coupons a day, 1,500 coupons a day. उससे तो ज़्यादा ऑर्डर आ ही जाते थे प्रोडक्ट ई-कॉमर्स में. We could sell at least in thousands, right? At least more than 1,000 products a day, which was by that standard a sizable number for India.
Correct.
But many things are unsolved, right? The first thing, for example, we also wanted to build a marketplace. We never took inventory, and to go to a merchant, convince them, because they had no clue what a marketplace is. Even we had no clue what a marketplace. We conceptually knew it, but physically we had never done it. To go to a merchant, to tell them that, well, you list your products. When a customer will order, you will only dispatch the product to the consumer. The consumer will receive the product. After a few days of that, we will give you the money. People used to there were so many barriers for a merchant to cross, right? That first of all, I'm trusting this unknown thing known as e-commerce. Then you're saying you're not even buying my product. I'm going to list it. Then you're telling, okay, you dispatch it on my trust that we will take care of it. After it gets delivered, the product has already left my place more than a week back. Then after some days, I will get the money. So it was a big sort of chasm for people to cross. So it was, I think, not so easy to convince people. But as things would have it, slowly and steadily, people started getting convinced. As size started becoming larger, one thing led to the other, and business started becoming bigger. But there were obviously, like any other business, so many challenges to solve. None of the new age logistics companies used to be present back then.
Correct.
Right? There was only one or two older school e-commerce
DHL and Blue Dart.
DHL, Blue Dart, etc. So there were many things which were very hard, but at least, given where we were coming from, where we were always solving the hard problems, but in spite of that, there was no consumer traction. हमारे लिए तो ये जन्नत थी कि अच्छा चलो हार्ड प्रॉब्लम्स तो हम पहले भी सॉल्व कर रहे थे पर फिर भी कोई नहीं खरीद रहा था यहाँ कम से कम कुछ करते हैं तो एटलीस्ट समवन इज बाइंग दैट इन इटसेल्फ इज गुड इनफ राइट सो देन सॉल्विंग अ हार्ड प्रॉब्लम was actually the easier part because we were used to that already, because at least in this case there was some demand which we were fulfilling. So I think then one thing led to the other and things started working out.
Amazing. Tell me about your series, your first, like till then it was just you're both capital, or was it friends, family?
So, both me and Kunal, put in whatever we had. And then when Kunal was coming back from the US, he had a mentor in Microsoft, who was an ex-Microsoft person from his college's alum. And I still remember Kunal was telling me this funny incident. Before a day or so when he was leaving, he was having lunch with this mentor. And the mentor said, well, if you need any help, let me know. And this is a sort of an American person, had never been to India. And Kunal sort of came back to India and he told me about this conversation with the guy. None of us knew what is angel investments, what are even VCs, etc. And he told me that, Ken, who's the Ken Glass, who was our first angel investor eventually. And he told me that Ken said, if you need any help, let me know. And both of us started thinking, yeah, what will a person who's a Microsoft alum sitting in the US, never been to India, how will he help us? Because we didn't know what is the concept of angel investment. Later when we were, that's what he meant by help. Maybe he can angel invest in the companies. Then we gave him a call. Okay, now we realize what you meant. We are starting this business, etc., etc. So would you like to put some money into the company? And just, kudos to him. He took a huge punt. We had nothing. There was just two of us who started a business. We thought we want to be in coupons. We had just, I think maybe a few months back when we started doing something. He had never been to India. He only knew Kunal. And that's it. And he sort of wrote $100,000 check to the company.
Wow.
Right? So that was I think for us, it was a very interesting moment because we didn't know this also happens.
50 lakh आ गए एक साथ बैंक.
50 उन दिनों 39 थे. 39 rupees का dollar था. But we were unaware of the concept of angel investment in the first place. And it was a big surprise to us that how is it possible that some guy who's never been to the country, doesn't know what we are doing, would value the company at anything and just wire $100,000 as angel investment. But, I think credit to him, and I think we'll always be thankful to him for having done that and taken that huge leap of faith. He later ended up visiting India on Kunal's wedding, which was 4 years after we started the company, right? So, wow. That's the leap of faith he had taken.
And what are how did you arrive at a value, or he just recommended?
He recommended a number, we said fine. For us, honestly, we had no clue how to value anything, right? Because this is really, really early days, and entrepreneurship still used to be a very infrequent thing. I remember when I was graduating from IIT, in the whole batch, there would probably, out of 500 people, maybe 2, 3, 4 people who would go into the path of entrepreneurship. And that also used to be seen as some of those oddball type people. Ye kya kar rahe hain?
Yeah.
So, because it was not mainstream at all.
And the opportunity cost was huge.
Yeah. I think just there was lack of exposure as well, right? Because not enough things had happened in India.
Was Sachin and Binny in your batch, or were they younger?
Binny was my classmate. Binny and me were IIT Delhi, same batch, computer science. We were lab partners in first year also.
Wow.
So Binny was the same batch. Sachin was a batch senior to us. And Dipinder was also a batch senior to us.
That's amazing. That's...
So it was a big coincidence eventually, but I don't think it was planned to be that way.
Wow.
Of course. So then he wrote the first check. And then we kept trying various things, because again, nothing was really working out. So we kept used to trying different things. At some point of time, I mentioned the 2-3, but we tried other things also in between. कि कुछ ना कुछ तो चले. So we kept used to trying something, paid coupon booklet, free coupons, coupons for for credit card companies, etc. And I think it's with this pitch that we ended up raising our Series A again. Kalari, Vani, which eventually, I think at that time it was an NEA Indo-US. They wrote a check into the company as a Series A, which is at a time when there was no Snapdeal. But I think probably she saw something कि यार ये लोग कुछ कर लेंगे. So she wrote the first check as Series A.
Wow.
And then we launched Snapdeal few months after that.
And then Series B, Series C happened on the back of...
I think after Snapdeal, things started changing. I think there was 3 years of intense work, but almost like pushing a wall that we would push, but the wall would stay where it is, right? I think it's only after we launched Snapdeal that when we put in effort, we started seeing some outcomes. So then I think one thing started leading to the other. Then we raised our Series B, then Series C. Then I think we just became one of those companies that is doing something which is going somewhere.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I think the story after 2013 when Snapdeal was I remember opening up the newspaper in Times of India and actually I used to think it takes me 4 or 5 flips to reach the front page of Times of India. And I used to like this Snapdeal and Flipkart and Amazon are at it. Why don't all of them merge and just take one page on the top so I can get to my main news? Because I remember it was huge because I started buying online. I was at that time at McKinsey and we were a bunch of I was a manager and my team was like 8-9 people in a room around this big. And it started becoming a habit. And then there was this whole thing about Flipkart going only app. I remember sif app pe, there was huge discussion in the McKinsey team ki galat hai, someone was saying nahi ye sahi hai. And then but it was a habit. It became a habit. Also a time where I must credit you and Vinny and Kunal and all of you because at that time 4 people left McKinsey very back to back, right? Saiki went on to become chief operating officer at Flipkart. Anant went on to be the CEO at Myntra. Just after making senior partner at the firm, which was like a huge deal because people wait ages to get there, and that's where compensation at the firm becomes very different, right? That's what you work 14 years for. And I'm like, yaar, isko 1 saal ke andar chhod ke ja rahe hain, matlab there's something happening outside. And Rahul and Sid went on to found Tribo Hotels. And they were a couple of years senior to me.
Yeah, of course.
But these 4 exits happened at around the time when I was frustrated with my Times of India situation. So I was like, okay, there is something happening here. And that was for a lot of us, this is that 2015 to 2016 entrepreneur cohort. A lot of us kind of rode the wave that you guys had started for maybe almost a decade before that.
I've always been very passionate about entrepreneurship, not only because of what we ended up doing, but just overall very passionate about entrepreneurship in general. And actually, personally, it gives me a lot of happiness to see how relatively mainstream entrepreneurship has become now. I'll give you 2 instances which I very vividly recall, which both happened very recently. Once I was giving a talk at IIT Delhi. And I think the professor who I was speaking with was telling me that very interesting, very recent. Back in the time when we started our business, as I mentioned, almost no one used to become an entrepreneur. It was like people didn't even know the word, right? I mean, एक batch में 2, 3, 4 लोग होंगे ऐसे, who were these really oddball type people. And I told you my own incident where everyone in the extended, outside of my own parents who were very supportive in me becoming an entrepreneur, everyone in the extended family and their social circle used to tell them, what are you guys, what are you
smoking?
bring some sanity into your son. What is he doing? And fast forward so many years that I think the professor at IIT Delhi, he was telling me that they ran a poll in first year kids of IIT Delhi of what do they want to do when they graduate. This is first year kids, they've just started with IIT. And he said the number 1 thing was becoming an entrepreneur. And that was such a heartening thing to see of how far our country has come. And I think you can tell that the future is very promising when that is happening. So that's one. And the second funny incident happened is when this was again, as I mentioned, one of the biggest concerns my parents or at least the extended family used to have with me becoming an entrepreneur is कि इसकी शादी कैसे होगी, right? Because he doesn't have a stable job, he doesn't earn any money, who will marry him? And from that to a few years later, one of my relatives called me and said, यार लड़की के लिए लड़का देख रहे हैं, कोई यार आपके सर्कल में कोई एंटरप्रेन्योर वगैरह हो तो बताओ. मैंने कहा यार ये तो दिस इज अ ह्यूज चेंज, सच अ बिग चेंज फ्रॉम 10 years back when people used to be worried कि यार शादी कैसे होगी, to now relatives calling and saying यार कोई entrepreneur लड़का बताओ. This is, India has come a long way when it's become really, really mainstream.
Yeah.
So I think those are the two incidents which sort of make me feel, at least anecdotally, that entrepreneurship is now mainstream in India, which is a fantastic thing, by the way.
That's amazing. For us, it was huge, yaar. Like, I remember thinking, yaar, a lot of the problems you guys solved. For example, when I launched my website, and I remember so many of us early D2C founders or, brand.com founders, कि यार भेजेंगे कैसे इसको पिन कोड में, कैसे भेजेंगे? वेबसाइट तो लॉन्च कर दी, इनसाइट तो आ गया, प्रोडक्ट तो बना दिया, अब बेचेंगे कैसे? लेकिन वो तो सॉल्व हो गया ना प्रॉब्लम. वेयर हाउसिंग एंड लॉजिस्टिक्स इज सॉल्व. अच्छा, फिर मार्केटिंग कैसे करेंगे? नहीं, वो कैक वैक वाला तो मतलब ब्रॉडली देयर इज अंडरस्टैंडिंग कि हाउ डू यू गेट अ कस्टमर. अ लॉट ऑफ थिंग्स व्हिच आई एम अज्यूमिंग यू गाइस हैव टेकन अ लॉट ऑफ years to solve in terms of at least technology evolution, logistics, warehousing, customer acquisition, etc., where we could kind of really focus on the thing that you were talking about, which is consumer. We could focus on consumer
I
insight.
think you're being too humble, Shantanu. Having been an entrepreneur and having seen so many entrepreneurial journeys through the years, I don't think anything is easy, and I don't want to take undue credit for having solved certain problems. I think in our vintage, we solved the problems that were the most important problems at that point of time because they were unsolved. At that time, when you started the business, I am very sure you would have had to solve many, many very tough problems because the entire world some things have become easier, but then those are easy for everyone. And as a result, the world has moved forward, and
Correct.
now there are different, equally challenging problems to solve. So while I can go back and take credit, I don't think it is fair credit for us to take, because I think entrepreneurship is a lot of fun, but an equally hard thing to do no matter when you do it. And
I
as a
agree.
result, I think entrepreneurs of today's generation as well, who are starting their businesses now, some things are much easier, but the competition is also much more intense. So I don't think, I am definitely not of the belief system कि यार हमारे टाइम पे मुश्किल होता था अब तो आसान हो गया. I don't think it ever gets easier.
I agree with that.
I think it stays equally hard, and I think it's hard now. It was hard back then, but that is the joy of solving harder things also. Back in the time when we started our business, as I mentioned, almost no one used to become an entrepreneur. It was like people didn't even know the word. There is sort of no one template to what a successful entrepreneur is.
I continue to struggle to admit that I am struggling with something.
Kunal are like a married couple.
बहुत ही सही लगता है मेरे को.
100%. Everything we do is exactly the same. Buying things doesn't give me happiness.
You have to learn to love yourself more than what you think the person who loves you most loves you.
Remember the message of Gita that just focus on your actions, care most about what you are doing and whether you could have done better than that, and leave the results.